Well, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you all to Howard University for one of many Women's History Month events that we're having. A happy Women's History Month to all of us. My name is Krista Johnson, and I am director of our center here at Howard University. This event is being sponsored by, we actually have a number of partners and collaborators on this event. At Howard, we're also joined by our relatively newly established Center for Women, Gender, and Global Leadership. Dr. Angelica Bean, I saw, okay, is here in the back. And they've been very busy, as you can imagine. I've been to at least one other event just today. So it's a busy month for us. But I also want to thank our outside partners, Ms. Amira Woods, who is Executive Director and also we have with us from the Wallace Global Fund, Dr. Ellen Dorsey, and colleagues as well for your partnership and hopefully future collaborations. This is really, I think, a really important panel and an exciting panel and an exciting moment, I think, to reflect on the issues that we want to reflect on. This is kind of post the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. We're kind of coming down from the high that was in December, but also maybe having a little bit more of a serious, reflection and engagement in terms of, well, how do we move forward, and certainly in terms of understanding and really thinking seriously about what that is going to mean for women in particular, both in the diaspora and on the continent, and certainly this was an opportunity for us to really acknowledge and to celebrate African and African diasporan leadership in the planning and organizing of the summit, in the, all those preparations, and in terms of the building of linkages, bridge building, and people-to-people ties. The kind of strength of the diaspora certainly rests with many women who are in this room, but then even beyond this room. So really an important, I think, time to take a moment and not only reflect, but celebrate and acknowledge that. So I look forward to the discussion that we're going to have. I want to quickly, you guys might, actually, some of you are probably more familiar than I am. Apparently, Howard's basketball team. Okay. So something about our Howard basketball team. Okay. So I think all of the most senior people have been flown off to watch that game. Very important game. This is a milestone for us. So we had hoped that our Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Tashiam Dubois, would be with us first, and she meant to be with us first. She really, really did, and would have been wonderful. But insisted on recording some welcome remarks. So I'm just going to play those quickly for us now.
My name is Dr. Tashi Ann Dubois, and I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Howard University. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone who's been able to join us today, both on our panel and in the audience. As you can tell, I'm not able to make it in person today because our men's basketball team clinched the MEAC championship, and we are all in Iowa. Advance on the bracket so that we can stay in Iowa for a little while longer. I really hope this video ages well. Dr. Bean, thank you for your leadership of the Center for Women, Gender, and Global Leadership. I look forward to hearing more about how it is that we can advance Africa-USA relations. Happy Women's Month. Thanks for coming.
So the format for this afternoon is we will, I want to bring to the stage now, or to the podium now, one of our graduate students, PhD students in the Department of African Studies, Ms. Zirra Banu, who's going to be our moderator. And she will introduce the three panelists that we have this afternoon as well. So we'll have kind of a moderated conversation among the panelists for about 40 minutes or so, and then have plenty of time for Q&A and engagement with the audience. Okay, over to you. And do you want to, should we invite the panelists perhaps to sit up front? Okay. And I think the mics should be working.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thanks everyone for making it here today, especially all of you here to celebrate women and achievements through history. We have a very interesting panel here today. We have Ms. Coumba Toure, who is the board chair for TrustAfrica and the ambassador for Africans Rising to Justice, Peace, and Dignity. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We also have Ms. Dana Banks, who is the former Special Assistant to the President and NSC Special Advisor for the African Leaders Summit at the White House. Thank you for joining us here today. We also have Ms. Imani, Countess, who is the Executive Director for U.S. Africa Bridge Building Initiative. So thank you for your time today as well. Thanks also to all of you for your time. We look forward to having a very engaging discussion. So we prepared a few questions here, but also look forward to having you contribute your perspective, but also ask questions. So as we discuss, please look forward to that session as well. So we'd like to start with Ms. Toure. We titled this event FARAFINA, which is a Malian word that you had proposed for this event and in the broader context of your current work and speaking tour in the United States. Can you please speak a little bit to us about the meaning of FARAFINA, what you've been doing here in the United States, and how this relates to your broader work in Mali and West Africa?
Thank you so much. Is my There you go. Okay. Thank you so much. Hey, I can say I want to sing. we go generally like this. We are an African people. We are an African people. We are an African people. Don't you forget it. Don't you forget it. You forget it. Yeah. We are an African people, and Farafina is the Bambara word for being African. And being African is, in our language, being black. And it's also stands for Africa. So Africa is not just the geography of the continent. Africa is where African and where black people are, basically. And so that is the reason why this tool is named FARAFINA, the black link. And it's really a tool to connect an intention to document also the connection that has always been there, whether visible or invisible, whether spoken or unspoken, between African people all over the world, but specifically between African people on the continent, in West Africa, and African people in the US. And this goes from a personal experience, but it's much more than that. The personal experience of me coming here with the Institute for Open Education in 1996 and really landing in Selma. So that's the first place we came. When we came from Mali, we landed in Atlanta and close to Selma. It's the first place in the US that we ever came to, and where we made family and where We toured the South, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Northern South Carolina, Louisiana, meeting not only people in churches, universities, farmers, cooperatives, artists, you name it. But it shaped, for many of us, our perception of blackness and being black in the U.S. And for, I want to say, almost 30 years, there's been connections back and forth between us. And Chance is here, she's from Selma. She didn't want to take that with us all the way to Timbuktu. So I'll say more about this, but it is the Black League, about solidarity also and connections that have not started now, but for every struggle that we've had on the continent or here, there's been always Black places who have been in solidarity, and we need to document, knowing that, and even build it even further.
Thank you very much. So Ms. Banks as well, we're going to you now. As special advisor to the president at the NSC, you were instrumental in planning and also organizing the recent U.S. Africa Leaders Summit that took place in December. Could you please tell us more about your vision for the summit, especially the importance of engaging local communities, youth, and women in the Africa and the diaspora? And then could you tell us some of the highlights of the summit from your perspective and what some of the key takeaways were?
I'll keep it brief because that's okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the question and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Really, I will start with what the president's vision was and is for the Leader Summit, but not only for the African Leader Summit, but for U.S. Africa policy. So really, the foundation of which came out of this recognition and this desire that, you know, there is no challenge, 21st century challenge that we can face as the United States without the contributions, without the partnership of our African partners. And so everything sort of flowed from there. Last summer, there was the release of the U.S. Africa strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, which sort of laid out the framework for how this administration, how we had been approaching it until the strategy came out, but also it codified what the Biden-Harris administration's approach towards U.S. Africa policy would be. And then the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit was truly a demonstration of that, sort of, you know, brought to the fore and really put a finer point on it. It was, you know, 49 heads of state plus the commissioner of the African Union in Washington for 3 days with over 500 companies, both African and American companies, members of civil society, of the diaspora, private sector, really, you know, converging on Washington. And if you were here and you experienced traffic disruptions, I apologize, but converging and meeting in Washington. And what the vision was to really take advantage of those 3 days to amplify and put on display the areas of our partnership with the continent, our engagement, whether it's, you know, through, you know, working together to address the issues of food security, working together in multilateral fora. Currently, there are 3 of the most integral international organizations are headed by people of African descent, by Africans. That's the WTO, the WHO, and just recently the ILO. So how we work better together at the UN and in these multilateral fora to really address the issues like food security, like climate change. Climate change, that was another area that was addressed, you know, how the continent is being impacted, not only from the effects of the Russian aggression in Ukraine and impacts on food security, but how things like drought and other, you know, challenges caused by climate across the continent are impacting Africans' lives and how we can partner to address that. And on the positive side, economic transformation, economic growth, and all of the innovation and dynamism that is happening across the continent, spurred by the youth. How do we work together with the youth on the continent? You know, President Obama started the Young African Leadership Initiative, which morphed into the Washington Mandela Fellowship, and now that's been over 10 years, and now there are scores, there are hundreds of these alumni across the continent who have had these experiences in the U.S. and have taken them back to their countries, and they're transforming their communities. So how can we continue to support them in addressing challenges, but also in reaping this innovation and this dynamism and turning that into economic growth on the continent? And something really innovative that came out of the summit, one of the forums, actually the first forum that kicked off the summit, was the Diaspora Young African Leaders Forum. And President Biden signed an executive order which really seeks to connect the diaspora, and that is the traditional African American diaspora in the United States and the African diaspora. So we wanted to be clear with that distinction, to work together and to partner, you know, whether it's culturally, socially, economically, politically, to advance, you know, our shared priorities and commitments on the continent. So I know something else that was also announced was that there is a coordination, implementation coordinator that was announced, a special presidential representative, Ambassador Johnny Carson, three-time ambassador, and he is working assiduously with my former deputy and also on Howard Below with Denise Moore-Manty on realizing the follow-up from the summit. And one of the areas of follow-up is certainly sort of fleshing out what that diaspora engagement will look like in terms of a diaspora council that the executive order was called for. So I think these key pillars, while in addition to, of course, acknowledging the political challenges, the security challenges on the continent, how we can work together again and partner with some countries who, because there were countries who were not invited, and I'm happy to talk about it later and take some questions, because of their military transitions that had taken place and their subsequent suspension from the African Union for that. But just because they were not present at the summit does not mean that we are not engaging with them. Of course, this is the daily work of diplomacy. This is how we work as the United States off of our values and engaging our partners around the world and on the continent. So all of these sort of pillars, whether it's, you know, food security, addressing the challenges of climate change, the impacts of COVID recovery, I failed to mention, health was a big element in the forum, and how we partner not only to address and recover from this pandemic, but also future pandemics. And I think Africa really provided a great example and a great model of that, and unfortunately built upon another infectious disease, Ebola, and how we were able to work with, the United States was able to work with our partners on the continent to strengthen health systems in key affected countries to address the Ebola crisis. Well, as in the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration, when we were looking at how to engage on the continent to, you know, work on the COVID-19 pandemic, really we were tapping into the systems that were already in place because of Ebola in those key countries, and looking at how we can expand them, and looking at how we partner with the Africa CDC, which was established, which grew out of our partnership on the Ebola response. So again, these are not new engagements that we've had on the continent. It's really plugging into our existing and enduring partnership that the United States has had, and also, you know, amplifying it and retooling it, because the world has changed since the first U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in 2014. So therefore, our partnership with the continent must also change and evolve and grow and adapt. And we, again, must realize that with how we partner with the continent really comes out of a place that we need all of our partners around the world, and to include Africa, to address some of these global challenges and also harness the opportunities that abound on the continent. So I hope that addresses that multifaceted question.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So building on that, your question for you, Ms. Countess, you attended the summit, and you also have been a grassroots activist and Africanist for many decades. Did you?
That's a compliment.
No, I take it as such. I feel every one of those things.
And with that, as we say, in many African countries comes wisdom. So kindly share with us some of the lessons you've learned, what you evaluate as key opportunities, and also where some of the gaps might be within the African and African diaspora community, especially regarding youth and women. So if you could expound a bit on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think before I jump into trying to answer the questions, I want to acknowledge a couple of things. First, all of us in this room are African descendants. Whether we left the continent a decade ago or 400 years ago, or left the continent 40,000 plus years ago, right? We all share the same roots. And so in a sense, we are all family. And like every family, at least like my family, right? When we all come together, there are bonds that keep us, that hold us, right? And then there are differences. And even when there are differences, we still hold each other, we still love one another. And so all that to say, we have two incredible women who play, one in the audience and one here on the panel, who did incredible work in terms of organizing, helping to organize the summit. And I want to acknowledge that, and I want to applaud that. And I really wish that we would all give these women So I was asked to talk about lessons learned and opportunities and gaps. I would say that for some, one of the lessons from events like the summit is that is that an event that big with that many moving pieces, it's going to is bound, right, to be unsatisfactory for some. And then there will be others who will be delighted by the opportunities that are presented. And so in terms of some of the opportunities that I saw, I think that it's always useful and important when people can come together. So I had the opportunity as a participant in the forum, this little design forum, to reconnect with folks that I hadn't seen or worked with in years. And I was delighted to be in their company. It was wonderful to sit in the forum and be introduced to activists, African activists that I didn't know anything about. So individuals who are doing incredible, remarkable work, young people, right, from every part, every region, right? that was wonderful. I think that one of the things that I missed in the forum was an opportunity for sort of a longer conversations. The sessions were relatively short, so we kind of got like the highlights of work and a few minutes during the between sessions to network. So when we do come together, I would hope that in future there'd be longer opportunities for focused conversation. But I recognize that it's tough, right? It's a lot of demands, a lot of demanding people, sending emails again and again. One of the lessons learned for me and working with an organization like the Brick Building Project is that the issues that we and our partners are concerned about may not make it to the table. So our partners in Africa are organizations and social movements and grassroots activists who are working on issues of combating illicit financial flows, who are concerned about tax justice, and who see as critically important sort of moving their agendas through both working with elites in African countries, and politicians, but also mobilizing communities to press from the bottom up, right? And what we understand from them is that this issue of illicit financial flows is a major concern for those on the continent. And we're talking about the loss, the theft, the extraction of enormous sums. What is it, some $80+ billion a year, right, being lost through a set of very sophisticated financial mechanisms, everything from tax evasion and tax avoidance to actual misinvoicing within particularly the extractive sector, to corruption and criminal activity. So there's these, huge areas where individuals working in collusion with enablers in the West and in Europe, and also, corrupt officials on the continent, where there's a huge amount of loss, which means that governments, even governments that want, right, to invest their own resources in domestic development, they don't have full access to those resources. And so we were particularly keen to have that on the agenda, and we didn't make it, but that's okay, because both Dana and Nicole and all of our other friends know that we're going to continue to be in conversation about these issues. So that's another piece, right there. And not every agenda item is going to make it to the table. I am, and I'll just say this one last thing, and then I'll pass the mic, so to speak. I am amazed and just excited by the vibrancy and the sophistication of the work that I see young people in Africa doing, right? I see young, fearless, young, feminist, Pan-African women who are really pushing the envelope in spite of, real challenges and just, discouraging comments and, encouragement for them to kind of step back and, wait your turn and, rein it in a little bit. And, they're saying, no, we're going to be out there, we're going to make trouble. because that's how we combat patriarchy, right? So that's very, very exciting, and I'm also excited not only by Afro-feminists, but also by the work that young people are doing around the climate, and not only in their countries and in their community, but within global fora, right? Where they, in collaboration with like-minded activists and social movements, really are pressing for change. And that's why we have made certain advances, right? Because there's people pushed, right? It's not because of gifts from above, right? It's pushing. So I'm gonna stop there and look forward to perhaps being able to dig a little bit deeper as the conversation continues.
Certainly, we'll definitely be able to dig deeper. And also, building on that, digging deeper, Ms. Toure, you have spoken first about the work and collaboration you have done with the Institute of Public Education, and also work done in community groups, churches, which helps shape your perception of Blackness over the connection of 30 years. Can you please help expand on some practical ways that you have perceived and recommend for people from all walks of life, youth, elderly, men and women, students, practitioners, everyday people? What can people espouse and live out regarding FARAFINA that you would recommend?
Thank you so much, and thank you to my co-panelists for all you shared. And I guess I'll work from what I've already heard so that we really have also a conversation. Because yes, the U.S. Africa Summit of the leaders was a big moment, definitely, especially compared to the previous administration. I'm not gonna get there, but it's a big thing. It's a big difference between having actually a conversation and completely disturbing people. But still, some of the, at least from the perspective and the standing point that I have, for many of our people on the continent, we still have a certain, I would say, there is a distance, and there is even a mistrust from a lot of the young people that we were talking about, from a lot of the women, even with our own leadership. And we're struggling every day with them to be able to see us, to see democracy, to be defending our interests. So when they are convened to speak in our name, it's not always as welcome and as upload on the continent that it might look like from outside. Because for those of us inside, we know what we're going through. We know that most of the time, government, at least in the way that we experience it, is not there for us. We figure out our lives most of the time, in parallel of existence of our own government. So it is extremely important to have a serious ear also to the ground while talking, discussing with the leaders, because in the end they're the decision makers. They're the only one that can make things happen. But to have an ear to the ground and to institutions, organizations, movements, individuals, artists, people who are expressing the real need of people. And the reality is that today on the African continent, there is a growing consciousness about the injustice that it is to live on a continent that is extremely wealthy. If you talk of, anything you look for. But to live in, most of the time misery and abject poverty, and to be most of the time not even, be able to be in security. So that growth of that consciousness, has different expression, different ways of being expressed. It range from, of course, people speaking it, writing it, putting it in art form, to people being extremely violent about it, or including what people are fighting and labeling even as terrorism, is nourished most of the time by that frustration, by that anger. It can only even grow in a desperate place, in a place where people don't care anymore about not only their own lives, so why would they care about other people's lives? So what Imani is talking about the illicit financial flow, that's a big word to name outright theft of resources of this continent that is happening today. But if we look at it historically, it's no different from what was happening before. It's so different from the time of colonial time where, yeah, it was very clear. It's no different from the times of slavery where the theft of people and their work was, that free, resources, whether it's the work of people or the natural resources that build the West as we know it today. And so it is extremely, extremely important that in the relationship that we're building for the future, that we look at questions of reparations. Because even if we talk about businesses, from the U.S. and Europe and being able to exchange, but on what basis? When some have accumulated across centuries, when others have been deprived. And then we need to sit down and look at each other in the eye and be able to do something that is balanced. So this is where we are. But how do we get out of this? And where are the examples and the models that could take us, from this? And I would say that the first step really is about challenging white supremacy. And not only here in the US, but around the world, because it is the mindset and the idea that there are the people who can live on and at the depend of other people, and that it's a value system that says that accumulation for profit is okay as long as you do it in a certain parameter. That needs to be challenged. If that is not challenged, when we're talking about, the climate change and climate justice and so on, even the survival of humanity, it's not something that's going to happen. We have to challenge those fundamental set of values and ways of relating to each other, and recognizing the humanity of other people, of people who are not white today. And recognizing that Africa is a continent with human beings on it, not a place where different powers come to elbow each other and figure out how to take what they need. And I will finish just to say that as as sad as it is, that we inherit from this mindset since slavery, as sad as it is, as African, we are a global people. We are a global people, and it really is not by choice. We are African on the continent, we are African here in the US, we are African in Brazil, we are African anywhere we go, we are African. And I believe that there is something there that we could build on. Because to me, Even though I come from Mali or Senegal, I know my people are here. I know my people are here. And even if they're U.S. citizens, and I think there is something there that can be built, that we can reconnect in terms of our humanity, that start from very far away, and everyone can do something. The first step is to learn about how we got here, about the history, because we cannot start just from nowhere. We have to know about our history. We have to know how we got here, and we have to change our relationships to each other and rebuild those links and those solidarities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Following that up with a question for Ms. Banks. In your previous discussion, also linking with the words of Ms. Toure, you had spoken about the opportunity that the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit brought, the opportunity for 500 companies, heads of states, so public and private sector, and youth, discussing important global issues like climate change, COVID, youth and opportunities, food security, disaster risk management, with cycles of floods and drought. So based on that, and also this work that Ms. Toure has highlighted regarding building networks, from your perspective, could you please give us your thoughts on the kinds of institutions and networks and programs that Africans and the diaspora can and should be looking on to build, if they already exist, how it can be strengthened, and if they don't, how it can be created so that we can take advantage of this opportunity following the summit, so that it moves beyond discussions into impact.
Thank you for the question. So I think that the main, in response to your question and also to keep the conversation going, I think the main avenue in terms of sort of building the connections and on the diaspora angle is going to be that diaspora council that is going to be formed and that came out of the executive order, so that the council's role, and this is President's Advisory Council on African Diaspora Engagement, and it's focused again on social, on cultural, but also economic and political ties and partnerships between the African and African American diaspora here in the United States and on the continent. So that is one concrete vehicle. I know there are many organizations and others that have great ideas about that and that can feed into that in those networks. But I also think, obviously at universities, at centers like the one here at Howard, I've talked to since the summit, in the run-up to the summit, other universities around the U.S. and on the continent who want to have greater partnerships. So one of the programs that was amplified and highlighted at the summit is the University Partnerships Initiative, sort of strengthening the presence of American universities on the continent, and particularly looking to HBCUs to have that engagement. So there are many angles and avenues to pursue in terms of follow-up from on that front, on the diaspora front, and the engagement and the structures. But just to take a step back and to go back to a comment that you made in terms of illicit financial flows, yes, that was something that came up a lot in some of the consultations. We've had extensive consultations before the summit. Unfortunately, there was no way that we could address every topic that everyone wanted to address. But as you mentioned, what this really is getting at is corruption. And as you know, President Biden, he has a whole structure laid out in terms of addressing and countering corruption globally. There is also a summit for democracies that's coming up in next week, I think, and which is a continuation from it's the second summit for democracy. The first one was held in 2022, but really Again, when we talk about values-based policy and how, the United States and our stance on corruption, which is not to say that we don't have corruption here, is that when we have it, we have laws, we have rules in place to address it, and which is that type of the same idea and the same model that is being used as we engage countries around the world. So when we talk about illicit financial flows, we realize the challenge that creates in terms of, stifling and stymieing innovation and economic growth from the youth on the continent. So just because there wasn't a specific forum during the summit about that doesn't mean that it wasn't discussed. Secretary Blinken held a number, I think 20 or more engagements, one-on-one or team engagements with leaders, with members, with other ministers, other teams, and various members of the cabinet did as well. So 3 days just isn't enough time to discuss the full range of everything, and the summit is not meant to be the end-all, be-all, right? As I said, it's a demonstration point. So it's meant to spark those conversations. It's meant to also make those connections that even if, during the Civil Society Forum, and let me tell you, that wasn't the only, yours was not the only one where we heard that there just wasn't enough time. If you don't have enough time to discuss it, then you're making the connections that can then follow up, and this is getting back to your question, what structures are in place. Government cannot do it alone. So what we do is we have a convening power. So that's what December was about, was, one of the things that it was about was, convening these different groups, civil society, diaspora, youth, government, to make those connections and to continue the conversations. It is important that we follow up, particularly on the business front, when we talk about the number of companies who were here and who were invited, and the engagements. And as I sat in that room at the convention center and saw, the number, it was always a number until I saw it in person and saw the number of companies and countries represented. And there were deal rooms where certain deals were announced, but also there are still deals from the first summit that have come about because of that summit that are still being realized to today. So the hope is and the expectation is that we're able to, make sure that conversations that were started because of the business forum during the Leaders Summit this time will continue to lead to concrete outcomes and deals that will benefit mutually beneficial relationships. So I think that, just to sum up your question, the structures are in the offing, like they're going to start to take better shape and form. The conversations happen. Some structures are better along or farther along than others, and some are already in place. But again, it's the importance to make those connections. And then I think just maybe the last point about the summit, it was really striking to me in some of the comments that I heard, and I take your point about how populations may feel about their elected officials. Again, we are an example of that in the United States, and we have the freedom to express that, which is why, but as the elected heads of state, that's why the criteria was countries or who are in good standing with the African Union, countries who are not currently suspended by the African Union for military takeovers, such as the case with Mali, for example. But it doesn't mean that we're not having conversations with Mali about what they need to do, or with Burkina Faso, which was another country that wasn't invited, and some of the challenges that they're experiencing with terrorism directly stem from the lack of government service delivery to the military and to their people. So I think that it's important to remember, though, that in terms of the summit and who was represented here, this was, President Biden's summit. He invited the elected leaders of those countries to have those conversations. And it's important that we have conversations amongst members of civil society, the private sector, which again was something that we heard loud and clear in our consultations, that that the countries really wanted, the leaders really wanted, and the youth wanted private sector engagement, in the U.S., we don't have any sort of direct, we don't have that role of directing government companies to do business in the country, but we convene them. So that's why that was an element of the summit. So, but really the third day, and again, I heard a lot of feedback about this, was why was it so sort of narrow and the participation? Because it was President Biden and Vice President Harris engaging with their counterparts. And so we want to, again, be respectful of that, but also make room at the table and make sure that the voices, and a lot of the conversations that were structured for that day were fed into by the discussions that had happened on the previous days. So, and we continue, that's why I said, the work of diplomacy is our ambassadors on the ground, our embassies on the ground are continuing to have those conversations at that level, based off of, U.S., our policy with a particular country, but also based on our values, and how we approach sort of the relationship in the country. And, like you said, friends who sometimes we don't agree, but we have to have those conversations. So, thank you.
Thank you. We have one more question for Ms. Countess before we round up the panel and open it up to everyone else. The question is building on what we heard today from all of you, and also keeping in mind this session, it's moving on or following up from the U.S. Africa Summit, and also within the context of Women's Month. What would you say are the crucial next steps for change and action from your perspective, and what impact will it have on the U.S. and on Africa and the diaspora?
Okay, the short answer is I have no clue. I really, though, would like to respond to a couple of comments that both Coumba and Dana have made, if that's okay. I really appreciated the comment that you made about the summit being a demonstration point and a vehicle through which the president could use its convening power. It's really, I think, very important. It was really important for me to hear, because it then kind of like shifts, right, the notion of what's possible. And not only what's possible within a span of a 3-day, multifaceted set of conversations, but also what remains challenging for U.S. policymakers writ large. I just want to quickly share like one story. I have many, but I will share some. So I used to work for an international labor organization, and so I had the privilege of being in the company of many African trade unions. And there are, if you look at the continent, right, there are like 4 big trade unions, right? They're kind of known as like the big 4, right? And that's the Ghana TUC, Trade Union Congress, the Nigerian Labor Congress, COSATU from South Africa, and then the Kenyan Congress of Confederation of Trade Unions, COTU Kenya. And so I met with everybody except the Ghana TUC. So I traveled to Ghana, and I was able to I organized, they received me, right? And so I walk into this room with the entire leadership of the Ghana TUC people, the head of the women's committee had come down from Kumasi. This was a 45-minute conversation, right? And so I was like totally blown away, very happy with myself. For the first 45-minute meeting, for the first 35 minutes, these brothers and sisters proceeded to tell me about their trade union movement and how it had been devastated as a result of the overthrow of Nkrumah which of course occurred with the assistance of the CIA. They went through it all. And I was like, I got gray hair, but I was a kid then, right? I didn't have nothing to do with it, but all I could do out of respect and because it was important for them to say these things to me was to listen. One of the statistics they shared with me, which was really stuck, was that when Nkrumah was overthrown, the Ghana TBC membership was 300,000, right? This is the 1960s. When I met with them, I don't know, it was 2015 or something, their membership numbers were 375,000. So think about that. Because in that intervening period, not only were there a number of coups and all kinds of political disruptions, but Ghana had undergone a process of deindustrialization, right? And many of the economic policies, not just advanced by the United States, but also by Europe and the multilateral international financial institutions, exacerbated those problems. The industrialization of Africa is not going to be resolved in summer. And I think that's one of the really, important things for us to kind of think about. The fact that, many of the structures and systems that currently undermine Africa's ability to develop are ones that happen over time. They evolve over time. And it's only through time and concerted effort and real solidarity that we can contribute to the changes that need to be made. That is one. And really thank you, Dana, for that. That is really important reminder. The other piece that I wanted to lift up in terms of it does touch a little bit on kind of what needs to be done. And that really is for us to embrace what is one of the headlines of this event, and that's reclaiming solidarity. And if you look up the word solidarity in the dictionary, Oxford, I did it before I came, you'll get a definition, something similar to, a group recognizing like common bond and common interests and so on. When I was coming up in the 70s and the 80s, the notion of solidarity was very much tied to common sort of ideological frameworks, common acknowledgement of the reality that wherever we were in this planet, people of African descent were impacted by white supremacy and also by economic systems that were not designed to be fair or equitable. Right now, though, if you were to ask me about how I would define solidarity, I really feel like the most succinct and clearest definition is in that African concept of Ubuntu. It's a recognition that I am because you are, right? It's a recognition of the fact that, again, as we've talked about a couple of times, there is this common humanity. And in order for us to advance, right, we have to be able to understand that your suffering is my suffering. The systems that impact you are the systems that impact me. And it's hard. I don't want to minimize the difficulty of that, right? Because here in the United States, right, there was a New York Times piece, this was years ago, right, maybe a decade or more or so ago. It said if you live in the United States and you have a college degree, you live better than 90% of the people on the planet. Think about that, right? So this notion of solidarity, we can embrace it, but it's a concept that needs to be embraced and understood, and we have to challenge ourselves every single day, because we have grown up in a country where white supremacy is a reality, where this notion of U.S. exceptionalism is a reality. And so many of us of African descent may go back to the continent with this notion of U.S. exceptionalism. And so these concepts, yes, they're words on a piece of paper, but they're real, and I think that they really represent the way forward overall. Because without it, we are fractured, we are destabilized, and we cannot advance. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. As the audience prepares its question, we're going to wrap up with one quick question for everyone on the panel. And it is, what would you say is the key message, right, that you would like to underscore to us at this time? So if you have one message crystallized for all of us as we move into our lives, move away from the reflection of the summit, live out Women's History Month throughout the year, and Black History Month, and all the different indicators we put in to help us remind us of movements and change. What key message would you leave with us as we go this evening? And this is for everyone, please, so feel free to share. If you can move forward, just building on the discussion as we move on. And we've had quite a few messages, but if you could add anything to that, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say that, before, saying the message, because it's also women history, it is important that we also underline something that I feel like we haven't talked about on this panel. It is the agency of women and what women bring into the conversation. And yes, it's for the summit, for example, it's President Biden inviting leaders of Africa. For many of our work, the people who have the voices are men. And how do you get in a world where decisions are made, conversations are made for the future of generations of people when women's voices are not heard? Well, if women happen to not be leaders or presidents of countries, does that mean that then what they think and what needs to happen then doesn't count? I think as we design spaces of conversation, we have to build in the design a portal or window for women's voices to be heard, no matter what meeting and who convenes it. Yes. Because those voices might mean something that, or some people might not believe or thought about. And it is in shifting and changing designs that actually we can hear other voices. So to me, when we have the power, when we have convening power, organizing power, any power of organizing anything, then it becomes our duty to look at how do we make sure that the unheard or the whispered are heard, because if we are really about making change and making sure that something is built for the future, then it becomes a responsibility. You're asking for a message. To me, my only message would be, be the link. We have to embody being bridges and being links. We are all of us here at a certain level of privilege, at a certain level of voice, at a certain level of capacity. And it then becomes also our responsibility to build those bridges or to be the bridge for those who are not maybe, not have access to the resources, to the voices, to the seats and the places where we are. So read the link, read the commission.
I was gonna say, it might take me a minute to think about it, maybe I could give it at the end of the Q&A, but then I thought about it being Women's History Month, again, that's because we didn't talk about it much, I did want to give a takeaway to the audience for this. And I think it's because I was really struck by something a mentor of mine said recently, who's a woman, and our ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Lynn Springfield. And she talked about, sorry, I think there's some feedback. I'll shut it up. Can everyone hear me? But I guess maybe on the recording they can't. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, great. And she talked about, how the work she had done with refugees and bringing refugees to the United States, I forget the country, and one of these people ran into her on the street in Arlington and said, thank you, you changed my life. And I think it's a good reminder, especially for me as a diplomat who looks up to her and some of the other scions of foreign service, Ambassador Ruth Davis, Ambassador Willie Brazil, who are both alumna of Spelman College, and I'm not only the product of an all-female college, I also went to an all-female high school in Philadelphia. So the power of women and the voices of women and my own voice as a woman is something that has just been instilled in me since my formative years. And to be able to then continue to be encouraged and promoted and given voice in my career by other powerful women, and to realize the impact that has on other people's lives. So, it's something, it's very simple, and I'm sure you've all heard it before, but just lift as you climb. Make sure you're taking someone, up with you. And if it's a woman, as a woman, I'm definitely going to make sure, and mind you, I mentor everyone, up and coming foreign service officers, but I think it's important, again, during Women's History Month, if you look at the impact that you're having, and if there are women that are not, or who are looking up to you, but who somehow do not have the means or the ability to really realize their full potential, help and lift them up. So lift as you climb, I say. Thank you.
I think the only thing that I could add to the two comments preceding is that I think it's also really important, as we're talking about, women and women leading, is to really try to, as best we can, kind of lean into some of the emerging sort of strategic thinking that's coming out of the feminist movement, particularly the notion of feminist leadership, which has really been a product of the global South. And it's a way of approaching feminism with the understanding that at its core, we're talking about power. And we're talking about how we can reimagine and reshape relationships in ways that we are all empowered, women and men, right? And it's also a way of thinking that recognizes common humanity, right? And that directly seeks to challenge patriarchy by organizing itself in ways that run completely contrary to the notions of power, the notions of leadership, and the hierarchical structures that are traditionally associated with patriarchy. So that, I think, would be the only thing that I would want to add. It's like, yes, bring in the women. We got to be at the table. We got to make sure we're mentoring, and also to make sure we're leading into these new ways of of building power.
Yes.
Thank you. So we'd like to open it up to the floor to ask questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll hand you a mic and you can start.
You can't move there while you might have to come here.
Oh, sorry, well, do you mind coming over here to ask your question?
Thank you so much for this discussion and all your contributions, it's really enriching. I wanted to, my question relates to what Ms. Coumba was saying earlier about, the need for the discussion to also be about asking fundamental questions and about reparations. And particularly in the context of, I wanted to know how much of the discussion in U.S. Africa relations, also when it comes to climate change is about some of the sources of climate change, namely the economic system that, greatly contributes to it and greatly contributes to the oppression and the exploitation of Black people, both, on a national scale, in the U.S. and internationally. So my question is, how much of the discussion between, the U.S. and Africa is really about fundamentally questioning this system and combating it? Thank you.
Was that a question for me or for, because you mentioned who guys were, okay. This might be a totally unsatisfactory answer because I'm a bureaucrat up here and I'm just gonna give you my answer like that. But I welcome you ladies to give, the answer you want. But so during the summit, there was a session on environmental justice. It was led by Michael Reagan, our EPA administrator, and it was working with actually Idris Elba's wife, because they both were able to join us and she works a lot in that space. It's one of her passions, so she also joined that forum, or that part of it was part of the diaspora forum as well. And it was really about linking sort of activists in the environmental justice arena with each other. So, and to talk about sort of some of the causes of this environmental challenges on the continent, and then how activists here in the U.S., how, particularly young activists, how they have similar challenges and how they work together. So, so again, it was the convening power, it was building those networks and those connections. In terms of, looking at sort of the root causes and symptoms, that wasn't really an element of the conversation, but I invite you ladies to talk about that if you would like.
Thank you. If anybody else, I'm sorry, please go.
What I would first say that yes, we are the bureaucrats, but we are sisters here. And the reason why we're here, really, and why we organize this convening is not to just have a conversation, it's also to look at what can we do and where can we move, forward. And to me, your position and your presence here is that important for us, because you will be able to speak in places that we will not be. And to me, it is as important to look together on how do we move this, how do we change some of these things. Yes, recognizing that for any problem, I guess, to be solved, we need to go to the root cause just to be able to figure out how to get out of it. And it is clear that questions when we talk about climate issues, the question of reparations are also there, for the whole world. It's about what is happening to this earth. Those who have been able to accumulate from it have to be ready to release resources to clean up some of the mess, and also to bring about some of the changes. And I think we need to be able to normalize that conversation and be able to let people know this is one of our way out, because some of the accumulation that if it stays like right here doesn't serve anybody. So it is possible to really move on those cases. So to me, being able to use even the powers that we have to convene and to have a conversation about these causes, to understand them, and to also look at what can we do about them together. What will be, what can we push? Because of course, not everything that we will propose will right away, have an equal. But what can we slowly, at least push for people to see? Given that we don't have that much time when it comes to climate issues, there must be a sense of urgency in that. So thank you for the question. The reality is that it's not always there, that conversation of going to the root causes, because most of the time it's easier for us to be happy with the conversation in the surface, but we need to push ourselves to go there. Thank you.
So do we have any other questions? You don't have to come up here.
You don't have
Yeah. The terrorists.
So that
I see hands raised, those men, so please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, happy International Women's Month. It's always good to be around, voices. Yeah, I just have a question, the presumption is you can't have communities unless you have families. So what recommendations would you provide that could help strengthen families and execution and aspiration of that? Because it seems like these days, it seems to be like a gender war when it comes to men and women in our community, and we talk about power and economics, but then just also just the viability that, how do you maintain a home? So I was curious if there's any, any suggestions or characteristics, especially when it comes to African culture, that could help Western, culture here.
We probably all got something to say.
you haven't spoken yet.
Well, I'll take a jump up there. So I wrote down gender war, and I had to put a question mark behind it because I wasn't really quite sure what you meant by that. And then you also asked about elements of African culture that might be helpful in this sort of polarized environment that I think you were describing. I don't really understand the concept of gender wars. What I can say is that when I was a new mother, and literally within months, part of me all the time was livid because there was no support. Childcare cost as much as a college tuition. Everything associated with taking care of a child was difficult. So my first thought coming out of a tradition of activism was, parents need to have a revolution. We need to organize, right? But then the other reality was we were too tired because it's a lot of work. And so the kinds of things that would have made a difference, some of the kinds of things, quite frankly, that President Biden has been pushing for. Child care, health care, decent jobs, right? Adequate leave. Because when you have people who are able to actually take care of children, raise children, and live all at the same time, I think those tensions perhaps that you're describing are lessened. And when I think about African culture, what I know about it, that concept, it takes a village, that comes straight out of the continent, right? And boy, does it really take a village, right? And it's not easy, right? But it's really important. I remember when I lived in Zimbabwe, right? I would come home, I would get up and go to work in the morning, and there would be like 3 people in my house, right? The domestic worker and the young man who worked on the garden. And when I came home, because I was married to a Zimbabwean, there'd be 11 people in the house, right? That village would be right there. And it was important because we all took care of each other, right? So that's another piece, recognition of the importance of social safety nets that are created when the government is not able to.
And that's what I would just add to that is, if we want families that survive, let's start with just maternity leave. I mean, in this country, I don't know, children will fall from the sky. And it's just another concept that I don't even understand how in the world it's gonna be ingrained in the Constitution that maternity leave is the right. And that nobody, human children are not born independent. They are an attachment for a few months before they can survive. So it's not an optional. For businesses, for anybody, I mean, people talk about, being performant in business, whatever. Human beings, need that thing. Talking about, I don't know, in the gender war, and for me, there's been war on women, for sure, for a long time. Maybe, right now, and some people have started feeling the heat because, okay, some women have been saying, no, we're tired, we don't want this, we want this. Or all of a sudden it's a gender war. No, the war has been going on women. And we have been adapting, accepting, taking on more than what we should be taking for so long. And now that women are not accepting it, surprise. So, it becomes a difficulty. I am all for family. I work for that. That is what I live for. And the reality is that what we need is a balance. Is justice, is what we need is care for everyone. When we do that, when we do the care to the people, to the women, of course that care will be transmitted also to the children. So we cannot have families and take care of children and discard women in the process.
I don't think I have anything to add to what the ladies have so eloquently stated. Other questions?
Thank you. I see another hand up, please.
My name is Patricia. My question is, history has shown us that any time a group of oppressed decide to organize, those who have capital impose or withhold capital to those who are oppressed in order to maintain the status quo and in order to maintain a system of society where the elites continue to excel and the poor continue to serve the elite within that capitalist space. I say that to reference Pan-Africanism when we look at people such as Malcolm X, Thomas Sankara, Lumumba, and so forth. These are people who, over and over, we've seen them come into Washington, we've seen these type of summits, and when they come out of it, we see people 50 years later where FBI documents are released where people were assassinated. My question is, when we have these summits and we have presidents such as Kagame who shows up, we know are oppressing their people. We know that they change constitutions such as Museveni. We know that we have people, different presidents across the continent. Even I'm from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where We know for a fact that when Tshisekedi won the elections, he didn't win the elections. The negotiations were made between Donald Trump. Negotiations were made in Kenya among the different Great Lakes region. But yet, when we have these summits, we welcome these people in these spaces and we don't hold them accountable as we speak of democracy. And then what we look more so is when we're looking at capital, we no longer look at the oppressed. When we speak about civil societies and giving them space, in reality, for me, I feel sometimes like it's just a space to create a blurred image. It's not necessarily to solve a problem, because we look at such places such as AFRICOM, who's all across Africa. There's no African military in the USA, but yet we come there to represent a certain order. But in reality, I see it as more so it's to represent capital and to exploit these countries. And I've worked with Imani, Counttess, and the illicit financial flows, and I've heard her over and over say that funding only is representing 3% of the economy of what we see on the African continent that's coming back. So it's not really that's what's making Africa function. So it can't really be that that's the problem. The problem really lies in, I feel that the exchanges that happens between countries and countries, and to be such a powerful nation, I think that we, just the same way where we saw where the elections happened with Donald Trump, where we held leaders accountable, if we can hold our own leaders accountable, how come we don't do that for African leaders that come here and tell them that we won't not just invite people who are doing military coups, but we'll also not invite people who are changing constitutions despite what the people say. So I just want to hear what the U.S. take and the African Summit spoke on those issues, and do they take those elements of what is happening on the African continent into consideration?
Can I just ask Patricia to introduce herself? This is the first time that I've seen her in person. I've interviewed her, we've talked, and when I heard your voice, I was like, oh. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Patricia Servant. I work with Coumba with Africans Rising as the engagement and collaboration coordinator. And I also work with Friends of the Congo, and I'm mainly based, I'm a movement organizer. I work with the people. So when I speak not for myself. I speak coming from a perspective of the people. We have a country with over 90 million people, and 96% of them there's an unemployment rate, and 4% are exploiting those people. So not only is it just Congo, we see this all across the African continent, and a lot of my work that I do is in the DRC. So for me, I feel like it's very personal when it's impacting your family, when it's impacting your friends. So when I see these places, it's exciting, but at the same time, it makes your heart bleed, because it just becomes another space of conversation, but not necessarily fundamental change.
Thank you. You mean these spaces are spaces of conversation, not change, meaning the summit was a space of
The
conversation?
State Department, IRI, all those different spaces.
Oh, wow, okay. Okay. So this is what I paid you to do, this is what I'm doing. So, having worked on the continent for the better part of my 24-year career with the State Department, worked on African issues, or lived on the continent. I lived on the continent for 9 years consecutively until COVID hit. I probably would still be there. I was meant to be in Nigeria with COVID, but I've worked and lived in Tanzania, in Togo, in South Africa, and traveled extensively across West, East, Southern, and Central Africa. So I must say that the conversations, we do hold governments accountable. As I mentioned, the engagement and the partnership that was on display during the summit is not the end of the conversation. There were conversations that were had behind closed doors, but there were readouts of those conversations. I was just trying to look up some of the statistics that we had of the different engagements at the cabinet level, but also at the presidential level and vice presidential level during the summit. As you know, Vice President Harris is on her way to the continent in the next couple of weeks as well to continue that. They've been arranged. The First Lady is gone. Secretary Blinken is there now. Secretary Yellen went. There has been arranged since the summit has taken place as well, of senior cabinet engagement. But so that is one of the reasons as well for the third day of the summit that it was leaders only, because we do want to be respectful, right? I mean, you can't hope to change something or hope to change a situation if you don't engage. So you have to have the conversation. And it's respectful, right? If we talk about, some of the African principles, you have to give respect to the guests that you've invited to your house. whether or not you agree with their policies, their principles, you have those conversations at the appropriate level. And sometimes those conversations aren't for a broader audiences, but trust that the people who were working on the summit, who work day to day on Africa policy, on each and every country on the continent, are well aware of the challenges, whether it's democracy, whether it's human rights, whether it's economic challenges, whether it's financial flows, corruption, terrorism, security challenges, very well aware of those challenges and are having those conversations. Again, the summit was a chance for those conversations to be elevated to a level that says, look, this is where we would like to engage, this is how we will engage in the future, it is not the end of the conversation. And we want to see, some sort of way that you can address the democracy and human rights issues and some of these other issues. So it was too many to enumerate here, and I don't want to just read from my phone, but if you go to the White House website, whitehouse.gov, and you look at the fact sheets from the summit, you will see not only the deliverables, but some of the readout of the conversations, as well as the State Department's website for the summit and all the readouts of the conversations there. But I can assure you that that is what I've spent most of my career doing. That is what my colleagues around the world and on the continent and over at 22nd and C and Nicole and others do, is to have those conversations, because we do have, we have the listening sessions, we do the engagements, and we understand, and we take on sort of those concerns and also concerns that we have from a security and political economic standpoint. Thank you. Nicole.
And I would like to say, Patricia, I am Nicole Peacock. I am part of that village within the State Department community to connect with people. And you're one of the people I've tried to connect with numerous times. I've sent numerous emails, and even without you knowing, I've included you in events and opportunities for you to communicate just what you did today. So it's more than a conversation, it's a connection, and it's reinforcement. And that's part of a process. It is somewhat bureaucratic, but there are people within the institution, like myself, whose responsibility is to connect with community. And whether the person responds to me again or not, I keep going. Many people can attest to that. So let's link up after this discussion. We're meeting each other for the second time. I met you at IRI, place that you also mentioned.
Yeah, I just had a baby, so my child's 2 months old. He's at home.
Congratulations.
I've been out for a while, but I've been in the continent. But I would love to.
Right, but there's also virtual communication, and that's the primary means through which I've been trying to connect with you. So yeah, you and anyone else who is interested and has some of these similar concerns, I'm part of that community, again, within the department that connects with people from the diaspora, NGOs, think tanks, but just people. So I look forward to, if you're interested, establishing that.
Yes, please.
Hi, Coumba and you have both referenced the growth of Pan-African social movements. And I would love for you to reflect a little bit on how the power in Pan-African organizing on the continent is opening up opportunities for deepening solidarity bonds globally, and how do we support that? And I'd love your reflections, especially given the history of that in the world. Oh, I'm Ellen, 2 doors.
Okay, I'll give this back. Thank you, Ellen. And Ellen did mention that she herself started out as an activist in social movements and continues engagement from a different place, but also plays a really important role in building institutions and supporting movements and issues. So the bridge building project started in November 2020. And in our first year, we spent a lot of time just trying to tease out this notion of solidarity, transnational solidarity, and social movement sort of intersections. And we did that through commissioning a set of essays, all of which are available on our website. I bought examples of 2 of those essays. They're available right on the side here. And what was really, and this work was done under the leadership of our then research consultant, Bill Minter, who's kind of an institution in progressive Africanist circles. So what was fascinating, because I came out of the anti-apartheid movement, right? And then I, did work in the movement around global debt cancellation, external debt. What was really fascinating was the opportunity to read and be in conversation with leaders from other social movements. So for example, one of the essays is Christian and Queer. And it's an essay by Joseph Tolton, who looks at the role of the evangelical right wing in the United States in terms of its attacks on people, on the LGBTQI community here in the US and in Africa. And that one of the results was a serious uptick in terms of collaboration, relationship building, and counteroffensive. And I would not have ever known that, right, if we had not had that opportunity. Some of the actual strategies and tactics are common across social movements, but the role and the ways that people come together and organize is unique in many regards to the specific issue or social movement itself. We also have an essay there written by Sarah Rycliffe, who works with the labor movement. She's a global labor educator. And she talked about how labor educators, they've been organizing, right? They've been exploring ways that they can educate young people new to the labor movement on not just the traditional labor issues, right? Like wages, benefits, conditions, and so forth, so like the centerpiece of labor rights, but also the bigger overarching issues, equity, social justice, right, and organizing, and how you work within your movement, and then also in the communities that are affected by the absence of jobs and the absence of decent work, right? And so, we've got these essays, and I would encourage folks, if you've got a minute or two, please visit the website, look at some of the pieces that are there, and I would love to hear from you regarding some of the specifics. So.
Thank you. We have time for one more question as we wrap up. Oh, I'm sorry.
Point of view, every other day, I'm added to a new group of Pan-Africans. So it's flourishing, like that, And for the past 5 years, I just stepped down from being a co-coordinator of Africans Rising and still an ambassador. We've really pushed and built, a Pan-African movement of organizations and people coming together and really building solidarity. Africans Rising for unity, justice, peace, and dignity. Also, you can find a lot of things on the net around it. Being also on the board of TrustAfrica as a philanthropy organization supporting organizations and movements around democracy on the continent. I also have a certain view of how those things are happening. And Imani talked about feminist leadership and feminist movement. It's also another piece that every single day, feminist movement, just in the Russia, the Urgent Action Fund for Women in Africa, and to feminists to meet physically in Russia, representing the organizations across the continent. So there is really organizing happening. There is a power, there is thinking. People know what they want and where they want to go. They know what they want, not only from government, from businesses, from philanthropy. It's not anything hidden, and it's, if people want to engage and talk to them, it's already, many of these things are written. Now, the question is, are we ready? Are we ready for change? Are we ready to release power? Are we ready to share resources? Are we ready to see the humanity of, others, of Black people, of women, of poor people, and consider them as we consider ourselves? It goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. It's a set of value system and how we see the world and what we want in this world. Once that shifts, then we can reach out to people and be able to have their trust, be able to have their energy for change. The people are there, they're ready, they're organized, and they know what they want. And it's just and you say, how do we help? Well, we need to be connected. We talked about it, and we cannot finish the conversation without, saying that the huge divide between Africans, on the continent and Africans in the diaspora is something that is hurtful for us. The fact that we don't know about each other's stories and history is painful, and it is a responsibility of our leaders to bridge that gap, to make sure that our children have access to the education that tells them the truth about who they are and about who we are. And that for people who are on the continent also to be able to have the information and know what it is that our people go through here. Because as much as we want to develop relationship, the USA cannot tell us about being in relationship with Africa if it treats Africans in the USA badly. Because these are our people, and it says something about what we can do when our people, in the way our people are treated. So what can we do? What can be done first is to make sure that the incarceration system that is locking up our people here is dismantled. What is being done is the poverty in which that touches more our people here is dealt with. What needs to be done is, yes, like Patricia is saying, to live up to the values that we are saying, and to be able to say in the public that yes, as much as we don't like Donald Trump here, we don't like some of our leaders there, and there is no way that we can, even if they're there and they've been voted somehow and through a democratic system, that we accept that the way they act and what they do to our people is something that we can accept. So as people here who are looking at building a different type of world and different type of relationship, we have to figure out ways to connect with each other and ways to work with each other, and we need help for that to happen, for those bridges to happen, and really that's what I would say.
Thank you. One quick question.
Yeah, I actually don't have a question, I have a comment. Coumba, I don't think I've ever said this. So about 22 years ago, and I'm only 25, so. I had a chance to go, little girl from Selma, I had a chance to go to Mali with Coumba, and we even went to Timbuktu, so I learned that it was not a place that your mom was gonna knock you into. It actually is a real place. But I'm saying to say thank you because a few years ago, I was able to start, I always, after I left Mali, said, I want to do this for other girls. I want to do this for other girls. I started an organization where I take girls on immersive educational trips in the diaspora. And so to build that bridge, they are able to connect with other girls. And it's not to plug that, but it's just to talk about like that spark that was created then. Like I might not be as activism and like not in that space, but just doing that, I've already had girls talk about how even at school, when topics about Africa come up, they're able to challenge what their teachers are saying, and you know, how they want to do it. So I want to say thank you for creating that space. And in a space that we went in with the Institute for Popular Education, it was a learning space. We weren't doing nothing fancy. The food was good, you know, the food was good. You all treated us like exceptionally well, but it was such a learning space. It was an eye opener for every young person on that trip. It came from the images that we saw on TV in the late 1900s to what was reality in Africa, like what we felt like was hidden from us. And so it sparked that. So I wanted to say thank you for opening up that portal and being that
Thank you, because we learned as much in that process, and it changed also our lives to be able to be in touch with fireworks Toure in the 21st century, with leadership movements, and we all grew up from there. I mean, you know, people now know names, you know, Natasha Brown, Latin's Margins, Taranabird, me too. We slept, you know, on the floor, each other's floor, ate each other's food, but there's been connection. And there's been education that went back and forth that built who we all are today. And that comes from post-connection, and that's what I'm asking for, that link. That is why I'm doing this too. This FARAFINA, this Black Link too, is about that connection that strengthens us and makes us who we are. This came from Tennessee. I went to Highland Center. I was about to cry. We found pictures that are 30 years old of people from Mali coming to the Highland Center, and you know, and learning and going back to Mali with it. It's been a while we've been at it, but there are ways to connect us and there are ways to grow our people differently.
Thank you so much, and what a way to end a very vibrant, engaging discussion. Thank you all for your time. We'll just wrap up with some words from our wonderful panelists here. Lean in to the strategic thinking of feminist leadership, right? We also can look at the power of women and women's voices and lift as we climb, as we move on from here, and be the link and be the bridge. So thank you so much, Ms. Imani Countess, Ms. Dana Banks, Ms. Coumba Toure, all of you for your time, everyone online. You can watch the video, it's streaming on our website, the Center for Women, Gender and Global Leadership, and I'll have Ms. Dr. Johnson come up and wrap the session. Thank you.
She was, yes. I was going to say, certainly another thank you for our panelists, but of course, thank you to Zirra, Banu, our wonderful moderation. Really appreciate that. Am I going to get Jamira Woods to come to the front?
Yes, please.
Just brief remarks, because the food for the reception actually has arrived, and I think it's being set up. So, but just come say hi.
So this high is to recognize all of you. You've been at it, many of you, for a really long time, and you are an incredible inspiration. So I look around this room and I see Imani Countess, who's my role model. Kali started. I see Coumba, who we've worked with since the early 1990s. Don't say it. Connecting also knowing the power of people to bring change and making sure that from those places, whether it's Timbuktu or all the places throughout the continent and the diaspora, that people are also organizing for policy change, right? So it's linking, it's alliance building, it's solidarity work, but it's understanding that change has happened because of people power. And so it's linking people power to the halls of government. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for the work that you all do, but we are here to push you all, right? We come from a tradition where we speak truth to power, and we're grateful for opportunities to do so, but we also know we've got to continue to push, because that's the only way that the systems that have oppressed Black, brown, and indigenous people around the world have changed and will be changed. So we see the extractive economy as a root to the problem, and we see people visioning new economies that are not fossil fuel based as part of the solution. And it's bringing that vision from communities on the continent throughout the diaspora to the fore. That's part of the change that the world needs. And we know the time is up. It's not a decade from now, right? Climate migrants are with us today. Right. So we thank you all for coming. We thank you for taking the time. We thank the students in this room that are like, we're just getting started and we're here and asking powerful, wonderful questions. And we thank, I don't even know how to call you all, but the icons in the room. You know who you are. Your work, your vision, your organizing has moved mountains and will continue to move our people. So keep at it, keep going. I feel like I'm gonna call people out. But then there's a reception, so we won't call people out. So I say to everybody, take time, meet folks you don't yet know, build those linkages, keep honoring our young leaders because they're phenomenal and they're doing their thing and they're making change happen in powerful ways. And we find ways to hold them up, and we find ways to keep at it. And just want to say thank you all for making this possible. Thank you to the Wallace Global Fund, honored to be in your midst. Thank you to incredible facilitation and moderation. Thank you to Howard University. We know that in this space, this Walter Rodney, the halls are just sacred ground. And we just thank you. In the midst of spring break, in the midst of a game that's historic, you carved out time. So thank you to the African Studies Center. Thank you to the phenomenal Center for Women's Global Leadership. Thank you, Howard University, for all you've done and all you continue to do. We are honored to be in community with you. So keep going, you all. The battle's long. Yeah. But we're strong and resilient people. So what is that song again? We are an African people. We are an African people. We are an African people. Don't you forget it.